I'm Julianna Forlano. You are watching ACT.tv. The Postal Service is a tried and true American institution, and just like everything else good, the Trump administration is trying to kill it. Not only would this limit mail access to a huge swath of the country, the USPS is also the largest union workforce in the US. Here to talk about these issues is the head of the American Postal Workers Union, Mark Dimondstein. Mark is the president of, as I said, the American Postal Workers Union, which represents more than 200,000 employees of the USPS and approximately 1,500 employees in the private sector mailing industry. Since taking office, Dimondstein has transformed the APWU into a fighting activist organization. He helped establish a grand alliance to save our public post office and postal service, strengthened by the unity among the four postal unions, helped forge the campaign for postal banking, and led the successful fight against a privatization scheme involving the office supply chain staples. Mark, thanks for joining us on the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's such an important thing right now, and I think it's the fact that this administration is undermining or continuing to undermine the Postal Service is a forefront on people's minds because of the pandemic and the idea that we're going to need to vote by mail. Can you talk about, in this moment, why the Postal Service is suddenly at risk, and then if you could give a bit of history about how it's been undermined for the last few decades, I would say.
Well, right now in the moment, obviously this tragic pandemic is having a huge health impact on the society and a huge economic impact, really on the whole world, the whole country. And the Postal Service has not escaped that economic impact. The Postal Service, and many of the listeners probably don't realize this, it does not run on tax dollars. It runs on the revenue created by postage and postal services. And it's been set up that way for decades. And for the most part, it's worked. However, the pandemic has caused a precipitous drop in mail. And think about it. What restaurants or retailers have been advertising or sending coupons, or airlines saying fly with us, as hotels come and visit us, or whatever people get through the mail. Grandpa here couldn't get the birthday card for my 4-year-old granddaughter because I couldn't go out to the store and then couldn't put it in the mail. So you just have a huge drop in mail volume and therefore a huge drop in revenue. Now, temporarily, packages have increased because so many people have been shuttered at home ordering through the internet, but that isn't going to last. So the Postal Service itself and the bipartisan Postal Board of Governors, which interestingly is majority Republican right now, has projected that without real financial relief, COVID relief, that the Postal Service will actually run out of money sometime in the early to mid fall. And of course, if that were to happen, then the right of the people to postal services, no matter who we are, where we live, what we call the universal service mandate, uniform and reasonable rates, all that could be out the window. And a few companies might get enriched, but the people of the country will pay a heavy price.
Could you explain more how it is that the Postal Service has to be public, even though it is pretty much, supplying itself with its own money, which is similar to a private company?
Well, it is a public agency. It's an institution that belongs to the people of the country, and we want it to be that way. In 1970, it was spun off as a quasi-independent government agency. It used to be actually the Post Office Department. It was a cabinet position. The Postmaster General was a cabinet position within the country. But largely because they tried to get cronyism and political patronage out of the system, it became more independent. And interestingly, it was a part of the product of a historic postal strike 50 years ago, an illegal strike that was won by the workers, and the modern post office was created out of that. But it does present challenges in times of crisis because revenue, which we need to be able to carry out. Here, the post office goes to 160 million addresses 6 days a week, sometimes 7. You got to have enough revenue to do that. So in this moment, that model that was set up in 1970 is at least temporarily not working. And we need for Congress to step up this administration to step up and do right by the people of the country and make sure the post office gets through this crisis. And it's kind of ironic that here postal workers, like so many other essential workers, are working in dangerous conditions, challenging times, out here on the front lines, very much appreciated, getting life-saving medicines into people home, medical information, census information, all sorts of vital supplies. And yet that very same pandemic might be used by some that want to kill the post office, do away with it by privatizing it, selling it to corporations, that they're actually shamefully using this pandemic and this crisis to try to accomplish that political agenda.
Do you find that support historically and even more currently for the post office has been a bipartisan effort? And have you seen that erode away under the Trump administration?
It's a very good question and point. It is bipartisan. The Postal Service almost always, I should say always, at least in times that the polls have been taken, rates the highest of any government agency in terms of the views of the people of the country, usually in the mid to high 80 percentile favorable rating, trust in the Postal Service. The last Pew Research poll of a few weeks ago had that rating at 91%, which is the highest it's been, at least that I know of. And I think that's a deeper appreciation for what postal workers have done in this pandemic, proudly carrying out the mission despite the challenges. That, interestingly, it was an equal rating, essentially an equal rating between those who identified as Republicans and those who identified as Democrats and independents. So it's very much bipartisan. Even the Postal Board of Governors is clearly bipartisan. They have a robust ask of Congress to do COVID funding. Keep it to COVID. We have some long-term challenges. They're changing mail habits. There are things that should be addressed. We're big advocates of more expanded services like financial services, vote by mail, and so on. But right now, there's a COVID connection between the revenue dropping off and the fix that's needed. So we have bipartisan support in the Board of Governors, a lot of bipartisan support in Congress, and most importantly, amongst the people of the country. Many of the Republican senators and people in the House come from rural states, and the post office has an extra special role. It's important for all of us, but it does play a special role in rural America.
Can you talk, that's actually very heartening because President Trump seems to pander to what he believes is his base in rural America, whether that be the case or not. So it is heartening to hear that senators may not want to go against their base in order to do what he is suggesting. I mean, he is on a march toward undermining the Postal Service.
Yes. Yeah, and you don't have to, your listeners don't have to take that from you and me. In June 2018, the White House put it into writing in an Office of Management budget report that actually called for and proposed outright privatization of the post office. What that means is selling it to private corporations. And then under what conditions, under what conditions and what cost people get their mail and packages would depend on whether somebody can make a quick dollar. And obviously, that would undermine what we call a small d democratic right to the universal service, no matter who we are, where we live. And so, yes, they have been on a path to undermine. It did not start with this administration. That's very important to point out. There's been a general march towards piece by piece privatization over many decades, but it has accelerated greatly. We've never faced in modern history an administration that, one, says sell it off and considers that an opportunity, and it is an opportunity for Wall Street and a few private companies. And two, has called it a joke, which is an absolute insult to every postal worker on the front lines. And it's an insult to every customer that relies on the post office for so much needed communication. The mission of the post office under the law is to bind the country together. That's what we do and proud to do day in and day out. It's no joke to the people of this country. However they use the post office, it's important to them. So we certainly have deepening and accelerating attacks on what we call the public commons and the public good, which the post office is so much an integral part of.
Can you talk about the workers who make up the Postal Service? How many Postal Service workers are there, and what would it mean for the industry to be privatized for its workers?
There's about 620,000 postal workers, over 500,000 who work in the crafts, as we call it, represented by the four postal unions. For the most part, they're good living wage jobs, largely based on this strike that I referred to of 50 years ago. Good living wage jobs not only help the individual worker and their family, it helps our entire neighborhood, our community, and our country. So what generally happens with privatization, although the claim is that it lowers cost, what it does is it generally does not lower cost. It reduces service, it reduces workers' rights, wages, and benefits, and somebody makes a profit off of that in between. The post office is not a profit-making entity. It's a wonderful national treasure that's there to serve all of us on a break-even basis. And part of the reason they need real financial relief in this pandemic is it was never set up to pack money away. There's no extra funds. It's set up to break even and serve the people. So the support has to come from somewhere. And we're calling on the people of the country who greatly do support the Postal Service, trust postal workers, to call Congress. You can go to APWU. It's a little hard to get the W and the U, but it's 4 letters, APWU.org, or US Mail Not For Sale. It says it all, usmailnotforsale.org, to help with the process of calling your Congress people, to sign petitions, and to send that message loud and clear that we expect Congress and this administration to heed the sentiment and the support of the people for the public postal service.
We're speaking with Mark Dimondstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union, which represents more than 200,000 employees in the U.S. Postal Service and approximately 1,500 employees in the private sector mailing industry. Just for clarity, Mark, how much do jobs, say, at UPS pay? Are they living wage jobs? Do they come with insurance?
Yes, UPS is a unionized company. So for that reason, I don't have all the details and all the comparisons, but certainly the career full-time jobs at UPS are decent living wage jobs. But when you get into all the mail processing, when you get into private delivery, when you get into the gig economy, you're really looking at poverty type of wages without benefits. Here we are. If there's nothing else we should get out of this tragedy, the pandemic, is that we have to have a more collective approach to our society and to each other. So if we all have health insurance, that keeps everybody safer, not just me as an individual. If we all have paid sick leave, that keeps everyone safer. So we need to get back to truly being our brother and our sisters keepers. And if the unions are destroyed in the Postal Service, you're going to have more people without health insurance trying to eke out a living, more people without paid sick leave, more people without job security and decent benefits. And so that, I can't do the comparisons with the United States Postal Service and UPS, but the general comparison with this mailing industry, and the mailing package industry is huge. It's over $1 trillion industry a year. There's 7 million jobs tied to it. And the Postal Service is not only the anchor of that industry, it's the low-cost anchor of that industry. So here you have a president that not only called the post office a joke, he said to get relief from Congress, the Postal Service has to raise package rates 4 or 5 times. Now, he never said that when there was $500 billion of stimulus relief and bailouts in what they call the CARES package at the end of March. He didn't tell airlines to raise rates. He didn't tell hotels to raise rates. He didn't tell restaurants to sell their steaks for more money. But when it comes to the public entity, he's demanding that the prices get raised. What would that do? Number one, in the day of e-commerce, we all love free shipping. What would happen if the post office is driven out of the package business and prices are raised? It's going to be raised with whatever companies are in the package business, which is what some of them want. They don't like the low-cost anchor.
They hook you with the free shipping. And then once you're there and you're used to buying everything on Amazon, even if they start saying, oh, it's going to be $4 and then $20, they're just going to boil the frogs until, free shipping is a thing of the past.
It's so outrageous. I had a prop, but I didn't think to bring it for this segment. So right now, you and I can take what they call a flat rate, small priority mail box, and we can pack anything in it we want. That's why it's a flat rate. We could put rocks in it that weigh a ton and send it anywhere in the country, no matter how far the distance is, whether it's 2 miles or 2,000 miles, for the same price of a little over $8. The President of the United States is demanding that you and I pay over $40 for that same box. Now, obviously, we would go somewhere else, and obviously that would undermine the Postal Service, which would undermine its ability to bring in revenue. So it's another way to get at what they would like to do, which is put the Postal Service into a death spiral, rather than providing the support, making it vibrant for the coming generations. There's always been change, and there's going to continue to be change, but the post office has shown that it can deal with it and move forward. But right now, we need the support. The people of the country need the support. The relief for the post office is not going into some CEO's bank account or shareholders. It's going to each and every one of us who uses the post office. Every single person in this country is a postal customer.
I'm assuming that because you speak of the brotherhood of man and shared good, you don't get invited on a lot of TV. They don't really let that kind of messaging out very often.
Well, we get there's a lot of interest in the post office right now, partly because of it's easy to take, and I'm sure I've done it. It's easy to take through our lives the post office for granted. The mail shows up at our door. It seems magically. We don't realize people work through the night to sort it. And we don't realize what it gets to be trucked and moved, and uh, and magically have a letter carrier show up at our door, mailbox every single day. In this moment, I think people are less apt to take the post office for granted. There's a deeper appreciation out there, and that's certainly a good thing.
Have you found more employees joining the union?
I don't. We run very high percentages in the union. It's all voluntary. I think that I can't answer that right now. I haven't looked at our last figures, but we've done two very valuable things, I think, that had people more committed to being part of the union, being active in the union, and speaking up. One is we've addressed in a very concerted way a lot of the health and safety concerns that the postal workers were facing. And without a union, we wouldn't have had that voice. And you see workers on the front lines that we all salute, whether they're transit workers, sanitation workers, grocery store workers, cashiers, people working the gas stations, truck drivers, and so on. Those who don't have a union do have less of a voice. So our people have certainly had a voice. And while it hasn't been perfect, we've put a lot of good things in place to make this situation the safest it can be under these terrible times. And the secondly is that the Postal Service is clearly under a new and dire threat with the economic impact of the pandemic combined with the political attacks. And that political, there hasn't been the political will. You asked earlier about the bipartisan support. There is a lot of bipartisan support in Congress, but it wasn't strong enough to overcome the administration when in the CARES package of late March, there was some real robust relief in both the House and the Senate side. And yet the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said there will be no incentive package if the Postal Service is in there. And Congress did not come back and say, well, guess what? There won't be an incentive package unless the post office is in there. So there's a new opportunity. The House has moved a bill that does have $25 billion of real relief to the Postal Service. That's to make up for lost revenue due to COVID, period, and the projections that the Postal Service has.
And what the Postal Service was asking for was 75, right? Not 25. So
the Board of Governors had a good, strong, robust ask for $25 billion for relief for lost revenue. Another $25 billion modernization grant that did not make its way into the House bill, but we understand that the idea is to bring that issue into the infrastructure question, which is an interesting way to deal with it. Since you're talking about new fleets, building new vehicles, getting big buildings off of the drawing board. So it does put people back to work, and it is part of the infrastructure of the country. And then they advocated a relief of the existing debt that they owe the Treasury Department, which is about 14.5. So it was really $1 billion. So it really was an ask for about $65 billion. What's made its way into the House bill was two things. One is that there'd be $25 billion of a grant. That means it's appropriated funds. It's not a loan. There was stuff in the earlier packages of loans. The post office doesn't need debt, it needs relief. And that loan is being used for the Treasury in this administration to put conditions upon it. So that's about the worst thing that could happen. But the 25 billion is in there. We're hoping that with hearing from all of your good listeners and people around the country that the Senate will do the right thing and adapt that part of the bill that deals with postal, as well as other things. Look, there's no question the cities and the states need relief. I mean, this is just the reality of the economic impact. And, we need to protect that part of government that provides good services.
If anyone is watching on Facebook or Twitch and you have a question for our guests, we're just about at the end of our interview here. So put your question in the Facebook page comments or in the Twitch chat. We do have one question coming in for you, Mark. Okay. It is that private companies like Amazon and Google are known to have monetary interest in our personal data. What would change if private companies had access to all the data that the USPS has access to right now?
Well, that's a very interesting question. We've always talked about how the Postal Service provides the last area of truly private communications. And as such, so we have number one, it can't be hacked. Your mail can't be hacked. You have what's called the sanctity of the mailbox. It is an extension of your home or your apartment. That mailbox is no different than somebody coming into your front door, so nobody else is allowed into it. So I think the question gets at a very good point is how do we protect people's privacy? And when you mail a letter or you deal with a financial transaction through the mail or whatever else is important to you, it's the most private communication we have. And if the post office was privatized, that is another area that the people would lose a democratic right, small d democratic right, because again, that is part of the public postal service, that right to privacy, the right to the sanctity of the mail. Turned over to the private side, then it's just a jungle out there, right?
Yes, ain't that the truth? Another question coming in from the chat. What do you believe that? What do you believe is the real undermining? I'm sorry, it's hard to read this. Undermining factor for the post office? Is it because that the Trump administration does not want us to be able to vote by mail in November? How much of a role do you think that plays?
Well, I think it plays some, because the Postal Service, as part of the public commons, is part of civic life of the country. And the mission of binding the country together, what could be more important than giving access to the ballot box? Vote by mail, by the way, is nothing new. Our overseas veterans have been voting by mail for generations. The President of the United States himself voted by mail. But for those who want to suppress votes, then they don't want a vibrant post office that can play that civic role. And to us, the right vote by mail, it's not a question of who people have voted for. It's a question of access. And it's a right that was won through bitter struggle and blood, sweat, and tears. And so we want to definitely enhance that right. How much of it plays into the hostility? I think it's a piece of it, but I think it's a general hostility to the public commons, the public good. And the post office takes in revenue over $70 billion a year. Those who want to privatize want to get their hands on what we call the public till. And that's the underlying piece of it. And the political implications of vote by mail are definitely tied into that. But the underlying piece is how to turn this into a profit-making machine rather than a public service. And it's not called the United States Postal Business. It's called, for a good reason, the United States Postal Service. Those are two different things.
We've been speaking with Mark Dimondstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union, which represents more than 200,000 employees of the USPS and approximately 1,500 employees in the private sector mailing industry. Mark, where can people go in order to help out and support the robust postal service?
You can go to apwu.org. That's 4 letters, apwu.org, or US Mail Not for Sale. It's a little long, but it's easy to remember because that's what we're about. The US Mail is not so. It's usmailnotforsale.org. And both of them have information in terms of how making it easier to contact your Congress people. The incentive legislation is moving to the Senate when they come back next week. Would love to see those calls getting into the senators as well. There's also petitions, many different petitions, but there are petitions that you can access through that website. We'll be presenting it within a week or two in a virtual way, since we can't gather like we would normally gather and have big rallies, but we will make sure that the Congress and this administration know that millions of people have signed those petitions and are speaking loud and clear. Again, this is not a partisan issue for the people of the country, and we should not allow Washington and this administration to turn it into a partisan issue and to use the crisis to carry out a political agenda that will undermine and harm the people of this country.
Well, we will continue to follow the struggle and encourage people to act. You've been watching ACT TV. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. We bring you, interviews just like this one with labor leaders and progressive thinkers, and everything you need to know in terms of winning our country back from the orange Cheeto in the office. I didn't want to politicize you, Mark, so I left you out of that last part. But
well, look, we're very respectful of the fact that our members represent the entire political spectrum, from left to right, right to left, and everything in between. And we do respect that, but we also have to tell our members and their families the truth. And the truth is that whatever people may feel about other things that this administration represents, there's no question that when it comes to our livelihoods, when it comes to our jobs, when it comes to the service we're so proud of, and when it comes to the needs of the people of this country, we are diametrically opposed. This administration is diametrically opposed to us, and we have to be diametrically opposed to what they're advocating and what they're doing and what they have already put into practice and plan to put into practice going forward, unless they're stopped by the people of the country.
Thank you so much, Mark, and we hope that our interview will help with the movement. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you very much for taking the time and having me. And I hope all your listeners are staying safe and as safe and healthy as we can in these challenging times.
Thank you so much.